and drawing it all together. Thank you, Miranda. So today we're going to talk about understanding yourself and others. The objectives of today are to explore what motivates us as managers, to understand how to be an effective listener, and to determine what feedback is, why is it important, and when and how to give it. Okay, not all feedback is going to be positive feedback. Not all feedback is going to be negative feedback. So we have to make sure we balance it out when we do give feedback to make sure that we're letting folks know how they're doing both in a good, what's working and what's not, so that they can, grow professionally as well. So we are going to start with a little exercise. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you. We're going to start with a little exercise, and in the chat, can you please tell me what comes to mind first? The things that motivate you at work are. What are the things that motivate you at work? Just go ahead and just drop it in the chat, or if you want to open your mic and talk about it, that's fine too. What are some things that motivate you? The sense of what I do matters. Yes, it's very important. That's the rewarding piece too, a lot of the nonprofit work that we do, the community work. Awesome. What else motivates you at work? It's okay if it's money. Sometimes that's where we're at. It's all about the paycheck sometimes. So it's perfectly fine. Results, similar to Rob, seeing changes and progress on the issues that we're working on, doing something meaningful, feeling like my skills are being utilized, fair compensation. Yes, Joan. Seeing how my work impacts others, challenging problems. Some days I am motivated by a steady paycheck and good health insurance. Yes, that's also a very realistic determining factor for many of us to accept a job, right? What are the benefits like? If you're still interested in pursuing a postgraduate degree, are they covering education benefits? That's part of the consideration when you're accepting a job. What is the healthcare? What is the amount of money I have to pay for my healthcare, right? Knowing what I'm doing matters helps, helping others and seeing how my contributions fit into the big picture. The sense of what I'm doing is appreciated by my colleagues and the board. 100%. Some level of recognition or that what you're doing matters, right? So now I'm going to ask you the other question. What is one thing or several that may cause you to leave your job? Or why have you left another job before? Burnt out. That's the number one. Better opportunity elsewhere. Burnt out, dissatisfaction with current job. Yeah. Bad managers and supervisors. Yes. I left other jobs when I didn't feel that management's goals, the organization's goals, and my goals were not aligned. 100%. Instability, negative leadership, better opportunity elsewhere, unrealistic expectations, having more to do than I have time to do, a bad manager, uncollaborative team, bad working conditions in terms of benefits, pay, company culture, interaction with supervisor, being underpaid or not get promoted despite good performance, lack of recognition, toxic team environment, treated rudely by those above me. Yeah, if we don't feel that we're connected not only to the work, but to the people, to the organization and the mission, then we are not going to be satisfied, right? Because we already said what motivates us is that sense of satisfaction, of helping, making a difference. But if the opposite happens, that also is going to cause us to leave. And also we're burnt out or not compensated correctly, right? And for some folks, depending when they're on their journey, lack of growth opportunities. And that's why you see the change in personnel. So think of all those things that are important to you And also think about all those things that are important to your staff and your team, right? And that's something to keep in mind from a perspective of motivation, professional development, and how to continue to keep them engaged in the organization. But we're still gonna circle back with you. And I'm gonna share with you a model. This is the Herzberg theory of motivation model. And so Frederick Herzberg developed this model in 1959. He did this by interviewing over 200 professionals in Pittsburgh in the US. And it was mostly focused on engineers and accountants. And the interviews dove into what the interviewees were there for most, what brings them happiness and what brings them the least happiness in a job. So very similar conversation to what we just had, but this was a more in-depth study. So 50 years plus ago, this is what Herzberg put into place. He was able to identify motivators that seem to have the potential to cause long-lasting satisfaction. And he called these motivating factors, motivators. Those that would cause employees to work harder, and they're found within the actual job itself, the achievement, the recognition, the work itself, that people like the work that they're doing, the responsibility, the advancement, and the growth opportunities, not only within the organization, but within the work, right? But then he also identified factors with the potential to cause dissatisfaction if they were absent or they were not aligned with the individual. And he called these hygiene factors. So these are factors that if they're not present in the actual job itself, but surround the job. So company policies, supervision, relationships, working conditions, compensation, salary, security. So if those are missing, it will cause people to leave the job. That level of dissatisfaction would rise, and then eventually either they will not act according at work, which will lead to dismissal, or they will just figure out that they're not in the right place and then leave. Okay. What's interesting is that this was designed in 1959 in corporate America with engineers, with accountants, and these values are still true today of what motivates folks and what also would cause them to leave. So the time necessarily haven't changed. It doesn't matter what field you're in, you still want the sense of achievement, recognition, and meaningful, purposeful work, right? So to increase motivation for your team, you have to ensure that hygiene factors are not causing dissatisfaction. So you need to know your team. You also need to know yourself and what could or may be impacting your own motivation that then will lead to maybe not motivating your team, or maybe you're reevaluating if it's a right fit for you, the organization is a right fit for you or not. Okay. So real quick, using the annotate tool, if you can indicate which factor is most important to you for your current motivation right now. And our motivation changes. Sometimes we're very more into the benefits, the rewards, the financial rewards, and some other times we're just really into the work, the countries that we're working in, the experience that we're doing. So if you can use the annotate, go to view more options, go to stamps, and you can pick between the star, the heart, whatever you want, and then you can put a little check mark or anything next to what motivates you right now. So it's between achievement, growth, and the work itself. That's what I see right now. Right. A lot of growth. Awesome. So one of the other things that I want to do, since we're talking about growth, we're talking about motivation, is we're going to get into groups for about 6 minutes. We're going to get into groups of about 3 or 4 people. And in your groups, I want you to discuss a time where you were motivated or unmotivated at work. And what role did your manager at that time play in that situation? So we're going to have that moment of reflection. and then we'll come back and share if you want to, or we'll have some aha conversations of anything that sparked out from that. But we're going to get together in groups and have this moment of reflection to see what happened in that situation where you were motivated or unmotivated and the role your manager played in that. All right, so let me make sure I'm looking at the chat. Perfect. Marinda is going to work her magic and put you all in group, and we will get back here in 6 minutes.
Perfect. There you go.
Coming back now. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. We don't have to share, but if anybody wants to share that situation when you were motivated or unmotivated and what role your manager played, we're here to share. But if not, that is fine. What I want you to mostly focus is the role that a manager has in individuals and how they can impact an individual's motivation. Okay, so your manager, your board of directors, they also have an impact on how you are motivated, right? But we also have to be clear and have a lot of self-reflection of where we are as individuals and what's motivating us right now based on our life, where we are in life, and we're based on where we are in our career. And, you know, we could have started out with being motivated by financials and benefits, and then it shifts to flexibility and schedule and whether you travel or not for work, what kind of work you're doing. So we also shift in our motivation factors. And so those are team and our staff. Okay. So, and then remember, each person will examine their own motivating factors through their own lens. So again, it's back to where they're at in life, where they're at in their career, but also having those moments of reflection is important. So you all need to do that yourselves, but also encourage your team to have those moments of reflection and have conversations with them when you're having check-ins, when you're having your annual evaluations. Where are they in this process in life and what motivates them? But the biggest thing is also being good listeners as managers, right? So we're hearing what they're saying, we're understanding, and we're guiding them through this process. So, you know, let's talk right now about active listening. In the chat, if you could drop for me, why do you think listening is hard? Why is active listening hard? So first thing that comes to mind, why is listening hard? Go ahead, Trent, or you can open your mic.
I was going to say so many competing priorities and sort of the default or expectation that we're multitasking. I think at least at the beginning of COVID, it was just some of us that were doing it. But now, even with my supervisor at the end of the day, she acknowledged openly like, oh yeah, even though we're on a call together, we're all working on a bunch of tasks at once. So that kind of goes against active listening. So it's sort of like the expectation that there's too much to get done in a day with all the meetings scheduled. So one must be doing this and that and the other. So
yeah, that's a really good point. And some of your colleagues on this call are agreeing with you. It's the competing priorities. And that's what I kept repeating to you, having that moment of shutdown, having that moment of realizing that listening is part of the work, right? Is not an added onto, is also very important. So making sure that when we are in Zoom or when we are engaging in a conversation, we're present as much as we can is really, really important. Turning on your video if you can, especially when you're having challenging conversations with staff or your team. Making sure that you're minimizing all these other windows. Actually, there was a study that was done that they actually said multitasking is unhealthy. It should be single tasking, actually. So we've been wired and programmed incorrectly for a long time. So we need to teach ourselves to be more present and more in the moment, so that we're able to then not second guess ourselves. How many of us, like we talked before, thought they sent that email, thought they had that conversation, forgot their phone, right? Forgot their keys because we're so all over the place trying to multitask that we were really forgetting to be present and acknowledging our actions. And then we second guess ourselves. What did I text back? What did I write in that email? Was it correct? Oh my gosh. And then we're having to spend more time going back and tracing our steps. Okay. So one thing I do, and I love Rob's point too, when I'm listening, I'm preparing counter arguments to what is being said instead of focusing on the other person's concerns. Yeah, we do that all the time. We're trying to anticipate how we're going to respond and how we're going to prepare ourselves. So we'll definitely talk about that when we're giving feedback, but it's really a lot of catching ourselves and being intentional and being present in the moment and what we're trying to achieve. Distractions, it can be hard to listen without simultaneously thinking of what questions to have or what you want to say or how advice you want to give. There's a lot of noise and filtering it out is hard. 100%, Rob. I think we're all in that space.
I think maybe assumptions and prejudgments, like if you're actively listening, you give yourself and the other person a chance to express everything and come out with everything they want to say. Despite the resistance of wanting to, cut them short and interject with your answers, your comments, you need to be able to respect the person with a problem enough just to say, or just to reflect that I hear you, I feel your pain, and I want to help.
Exactly. It's an acknowledgement piece, right? But it's also being there and being open. So technology constantly interrupts meetings, thinking, conversations. Yes, need to put boundaries around technology can interrupt you 100%. Something simple you could do about notifications of emails. Turn off the email notifications on the weekends for the work emails or after a certain time. That should be fine. You should feel comfortable doing that. Unless there's an emergency happening that weekend, then that's different. But setting your own boundaries of how to reprogram yourself and re-educate yourself on how you want to focus and how you want to listen is very important. So sometimes you could be too emotional rather than being rational. Yes, Harundin. We will definitely talk about that. Not every moment is the right moment for also feedback. So we will go into that a little bit more. So I want us to try a little exercise. So let's see what listening can sometimes feel like. And I'm going to be very clear with my instructions. And this is an opportunity for you to practice your listening right now. So Mirinda is going to copy and paste the link on the chat. Do not open it. I need you to have ready a pen and paper around you. You are going to be put in groups of 2. And you're going to decide who will be person A and who will be person B. Person A is the only one that will open the link. Person B, you do not open the link. Person A is going to describe the picture clearly without showing it to their partner. The goal is for you to describe the picture so that person B can draw it themselves. Person B, you're going to listen carefully and draw the picture as you hear it described. There are no questions. And you will have 5 minutes. So there might not be too much pleasantries and hi, how are you? But you will have 5 minutes to do this task. Are we clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Will the link be reposted into each group?
You can find it in the chat and we can rebroadcast it. That would not be a problem. So Mirinda, right before we break, we're going to put it back on the chat.
But we don't know who's going to be A and B. So how do we decide who opens the link?
So when you get in your groups, you're going to decide who's A, who's B.
Right. And will the link be there to open when we're in
Yes.
our groups? Okay.
Yeah, you will see it on the chat. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Awesome. So Mirinda's going to take it away and we're going to repost the link right now so that it's fresh in everybody's chat when you break into your groups. All right. Let's do your magic, Marindo.
Perfect. There you go.
See you in 5 minutes. Okay, everybody's gonna start coming back now. Welcome back, everyone. How was it? First of all, let's start with those that were drawers. Can you open your cameras and show us your drawing? Oh my God, let me see.
If I can.
Hang on, I have to take my background off.
Oh, wow. Okay. These are great. Oh, these are great. Okay. Awesome. So who wants to share? How did this feel? If you were the person giving the instructions, how was that for you?
I'm sorry I got kicked out.
Oh, Rahad. Were you the drawer or the person giving the instructions?
I was the drawer.
Oh, you want to share your drawing with us?
Yes, but for some reason, I can't get my, oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so this is what I,
Ooh. Okay. Everybody they were pretty similar. Okay. So for the person giving the instructions, how was that for you? Was it comfortable? Was it uncomfortable?
Okay, let me start. I think it was, it looks easy at the beginning,
Mhm.
but on realizing that my partner is not able to visualize what I'm seeing, I had to give very clear instructions and go step by step so that we get it right.
Okay. Perfect. Now that we see it, oh, that's pretty consistent with the drawing. Thank you, Nada. Thank you, Moses. Anybody else that was the person giving the instructions?
In my experience, what I found myself struggling with was how was I being understood? Was I expressing myself clearly enough to convey the visual image? Because the way I saw it might not be the way, and the way I explained it might not be the way somebody necessarily heard it.
Okay, interesting. That's always what happens. How about the people that were receiving the instructions on drawing? How was that experience for you?
I think because you prepped us well, like we were prepared to take those instructions from that person. The
Mhm.
trust factor was high. We were willing to take on those instructions and, you know, translate them into a drawing and accept open-mindedly all the instructions that we were given and try to work together towards being able to present the best picture possible that we can visualize together.
Awesome. Yeah, trust is a factor. And I like how you said that, since you knew more or less what you were getting into. There was already trust and you knew that you were going to develop something together. That's interesting.
And
So it's all about our
teamwork is
mindset.
important. Like teamwork is very important.
Exactly.
I cannot see what she can, and she cannot draw what I'm drawing.
Exactly. So you have to rely on each other's strengths, right? We have to trust that they know what they're doing, and we have to trust ourselves that we're going to do what we're supposed to do as well. So trust is important. Awesome. Thank you, Rahad. Anybody else want to share that you were a drawer? How were your partners? Were they clear? Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, so Amber was very clear in her instructions. She was my partner. I did, even though following, trying to make sure, listening to everything, I made my own bias by the time, or assumption by the time she got to the second description of, oh, it's going to be this. And then if she'd pause, like when she was describing the windows, I'd ask an additional question, which I think I do quite frequently if I want to make sure I'm following someone. So I'd be like, okay, are they in the middle or like left to right, just to clarify.
Perfect. But what's interesting was like there was not supposed to be any questions.
Right. And she just kind of like go and re-describe. And yeah, that's where my challenge is I always ask that question because I want to make sure that I'm understanding as I go along.
That's interesting. No, and you know, those are things that what I like about this exercise. It's so simple. First of all, some people get concerned. They're like, oh my gosh, I wonder what I'm going to be drawing, right? There's going to be this Picasso coming about, and it's not. So we start building that anticipation as well of like, what's coming. And then once we realize it's something a little more simpler, then we're like, oh, it's a house. I got this, right? And so then the bias starts coming in. And then our natural go-tos of asking questions or second guessing ourselves starts happening instead of just following the process. So it's interesting. Victoria says it was hard not to ask questions, right? It's hard. It's really hard. Daniela, you had your mic open. Did you want to say something or just a mistake? Don't want to put you on the spot, but I also want to acknowledge if you do want to say something.
No, just that yeah, I felt that kind of little bit of pressure wanting to get it right, and to follow my instructor, and yes, a little bit second guessing as well, like you know, kind of with this pressure of wanting to get it right, like am I understanding what kind of triangle she's talking about or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We also put ourselves in a lot of pressure, right? We don't give ourselves enough grace to have flexibility or not be perfect or just not know something, right? So it's all that comes out. So just think about, also some of you had connectivity issues and technology issues. So think about that too, as far as how that also now our new reality is with having technology and being remote. So what are not only the language barriers, but also technology barriers and connectivity when we're managing and we're leading teams, okay? And the reality is that we cannot expect anyone to actively listen 100% of the time. It's too hard. It's too hard. That's just reality. So there are times active listening is especially important, and that's during difficult conversations and coaching scenarios with our staff. What people say, you know, I'm going to show you this little drawing here. I don't know if this wasn't allowed, but I redrew the image 3 times to get it perfect. Wow, Nita, that is interesting. It wasn't not allowed, if that's what made you comfortable, but that's interesting that that's what you wanted to do. That's great. See, all these little things come out and something so simple. Go ahead, Diego.
So yeah, so basically we because we have enough time and I didn't know how she was perceiving my instructions, we drew it one time and said, okay, we have enough time. Let me go over it again now that you have like this picture in your mind and in front of you, and let me describe it in a way that we can, you know, maybe get it closer to the image that I see in front of me. And so we went through like a second time.
But that's interesting because you both were on the same page about it, and then you just went back and made tweaks, right? That was that debrief that we normally say also should happen. How are things going? How are they not going? Let's reassess, reevaluate. And you had enough time to do that.
Yeah.
The whole point is also being on the same page, right? About it, and making sure that you're also allowing yourself the grace to not be perfect all the time. It's a balance. But that's interesting. I like how you guys share that. Thank you for sharing that. Some people wouldn't have shared that, but there's no right or wrong. It's just what your process was. And I hope this kind of showed you how, if you were giving instructions, how you feel about giving instructions. And then if you were receiving the instructions, also the things that you go to for when you receive instructions, and what are some things that you might need to be more aware that you do to be more in the moment and to be more present when you're actively listening, instead of jumping to your pre-assumptions or your questions and things like that we normally tend to do. Okay. Let me share my screen real quick with you. So this iceberg pictures is actually pretty interesting because what people say is like an iceberg, right? What they say out loud is what you see in the surface. But what about what's under everything underneath? We may hear what I want, but we don't hear why they want it and what they mean, what their true motives are, what their true interests are. Most conversations happen at a surface level, at the I want level, right? And if we really listen, we can sometimes start to get below the surface to understand more. And that helps us find out why someone wants what they want, why they act how they act, and what their motives are, and how we can find a convergence of interests, which is the key to finding solutions that meets both of our needs. So what's that line of intersection? Where do we all come across, right? So how do we actively listen? We unfiltered listening, listening without responding. You reflect, you repeat back what you heard, and you inquire, you ask questions, you generate ideas before you're judging them. Okay, so let's take the example. This is extremely difficult to do online, 100%, Rob, but it's about being intentional. Just like we have to be intentional about connecting and communicating and building that relationship with our teams, we have to be very intentional. And that's why I say we have to re-educate and reprogram ourselves to be in the present, turning off that phone, putting it away, minimizing all the other screens that we want to, of work that we want to do while we're here. I mean, just even being here is testing a lot of you and not wanting to multitask, right? So, and we recognize that. And that's why I say, you know, close your screens, turn on your monitor, let's engage and let's be present. And it's just that constant reminder that you have to do for yourself as well. So I'm going to give you a little example. So there's a mother that has one orange and she has two kids who are fighting over the orange. One is saying, I need the orange, I want the orange, but what can the mother do? What are her options, right? She can cut the orange in half. No one gets the orange is another option, or she literally lets it fight it out. Here's the orange, figure it out, right? But what about asking the kids? Turns out one kid needs the orange rind to make a cake. The other just wants to drink the orange juice. So if the mother cuts the orange in half, no one gets enough of what they want or what they need, right? So I want the orange. I want is what you hear at the surface. And if you're not careful, what you hear on the surface can trigger emotions because they're filtered listening. You're angry. Why can't they just share it? You start building your own bias of the situation and your own frustration starts coming out. Yet what is underneath the surface are the motives, the why. Why do they need this orange? So when you try to understand why someone wants something or why someone's doing something, you can come close to finding some common ground so that you can start finding a solution, right? And you move on from complaining to acknowledging and to resolving and coming up with how do we move forward. Okay. So this is what I was sharing with you. So thinking about this iceberg, the unfiltered listening is listening without responding. You're just absorbing. You're just taking it all in. So this is
a bit
hard.
like mediation, isn't it?
It is. It is. You have to hear both sides. But the problem is you have to mediate yourself.
Yeah.
You have to catch yourself.
So basically you listen in and you don't give the solution until you understand the full picture.
Exactly. And you're removing your own bias. You're not allowing your own assumptions.
Yeah.
Exactly. So unfiltered listening is hard because we're spending time forming our own response, right? Instead of listening. We want to come up with solutions to fix it instead of really trying to figure out what the problem is. So, or we share our own experiences. Oh, this happened to me, right? And we're trying to emphasize our own experience instead of, again, listening. So how do we listen without responding? Stop putting what you hear through your own filters, your own expectations, your own opinions, your own experiences, right? Try to dial back the noise in your head and be intentional and say to yourself, I'm going to listen. I'm going to focus. I'm going to turn off my judgments and my preconceptions. And you have to practice this. It's honestly reprogramming yourself. Okay. And controlling that face, right? When you're being told something, controlling those emotions as well, because your body language is also reacting to what is being said. And then reflect, repeat back what you hear. Why is this hard to do? Because again, we're trying to come up with our own questions, our own solutions to how we're going to fix this. But it's difficult because we also have to validate the person. You don't have to agree with what they're saying, but you need to validate them. I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Are you saying this? Right? So it's important. So the other person feels that they've been heard, that they've been acknowledged. And the chances are it's because you don't feel heard that then they continue to act out or they want to stop the conversation. So reflection of what you're listening. So say, is this what you're saying? Excuse me. And avoid jumping to responses. So hear what is being said to you. Acknowledge the person's feelings or situation, right? And then respond back. This is what I hear, right? Repeat back of what is being said. With no words, no extra emotions. You're just reframing exactly what is being said to you to make sure that you're clear. So try to make sure you're not labeling. It sounds like you feel angry about, right? So that's what we're trying to do. It sounds like you're feeling like this. It sounds like this is what happened. Okay. The whole point too is to de-escalate the situation if someone's really upset and really worked up. So we don't want to add fuel to the fire by agreeing necessarily of how they're feeling or about the situation, but it's more acknowledging how they feel, right? And understanding how they feel. And then we ask questions. Again, this is hard to do because we're making assumptions. We think this is what happened. We're focusing on that top layer of the iceberg. So it's important to ask questions. We can never really know what someone's experience is until we ask them. So keep it simple, make them open-ended questions. Help me understand why that's important to you. Okay. Avoid leading questions. So questions that where your personal agenda or beliefs are built in, starting with clearly you don't like what you're doing, right? We don't want to tell that to someone. It's more like, help me understand what's bothering you about the situation, or what is it about the work that, it seems to be an issue, or it's giving you some reaction. And then generate ideas with them before judging them. So the final piece is of active listening is to engage the person with the end goal to finding solutions and moving forward. You can do this by generating ideas with them. Okay, so this is what happened. How will we handle this better? Or this is the problem with the work. How can we make the situation better? Okay. Any thoughts or comments on this? I know active listening was a big thing, and we're going to jump into feedback in a moment. Perfect. So I have been talking a lot, and you're now going to get a chance to practice active listening while giving feedback and receiving feedback. Okay. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Show of hands, you can, if you have your videos open, you can raise your hand or use the emojis. But how many of you think you give enough feedback to your teams? Okay.
That doesn't mean the team actually accepts the feedback.
No, I'm just saying, how many of you feel that you give enough feedback, right? That your team knows where you stand with them. Okay. How many of you feel that you get enough feedback? Okay. This is interesting.
It doesn't mean that they agree with you all the time.
No, we're not talking about
feedback.
agreement. Yeah, receiving it is something else, but that you feel like, if we were to ask people about a situation or how does your boss feel about you, that they will know, right? Your areas of improvement, your areas of that you're doing good, where my trajectory is, and that you have the same of your supervisor or board of directors, that you know where you stand. That's pretty much it. The thing is, we don't give enough feedback. There are very few people that give enough feedback, and most of the time they're not receiving enough feedback, because that could be an organizational cultural thing, or we put it to the back burner because we don't have time and we don't see it as part of the work that we're supposed to be doing. So we need to get better at that. So, but what we're going to do is let's talk a little bit more about feedback. What is feedback to you? In the chat, or you could open your mic. What is feedback to you? What is your definition of feedback?
Basically,
better.
feedback could be like how your team is responding to whatever you're sharing with them and how they feel about all of this. And at what stage are they able to deliver and what they're not able to deliver, and trying to help them overcome the obstacles that they're facing, and try to practice empathy both ways. It's like, okay, so this is what we need to perform, and this is your part of it. So you need to help them deliver and help them with the delivery process as well. So you give them the instructions and they give you feedback on how they are able to understand, number one, what they need to do. They need to understand your task and why you're trying to do this and why you're asking them to do this, and also help them to deliver what you're asking them to do, and what their obstacles and challenges are in that delivery process. So it's a two-way street.
Right. And it's just the context is the process of giving people information about the results of their actions, right? Feedback on performance is important part of your job as a manager, right? Because people need to know what's working, what's not, and how that, needs to be done better. So what is the purpose of feedback? So we just talked about what is feedback, but what is the purpose of us giving feedback? Information that can help or aid someone to be able to do their job to the best of their ability. Okay.
So
And also to understand the bigger picture is like what their role is. And I'm sorry, Diego, did I just cut you in?
go ahead,
like
go
a
ahead, please.
Yeah.
So basically to understand the bigger picture and what their role is in this, and how they can like either help the process or be a bottleneck in the process. Like, you go at the pace, or the project works, or the tasks work at the pace of the slowest person delivering that. And why is that person the slowest person? Maybe they're overworked, they cannot perform, they've got too much on their hands. They don't know why they need to do this. Sometimes you get a lot of resistance from team members.
Right. That's a good point, Rahad. And so go ahead, Diego.
Especially with things that are complicated like feedback, I try to keep things simple. So for me, feedback is how close either how close or far you are from reaching a goal, which is the expectation, right? So, and then first you'll say, you were very close, or, you exceeded. So that how far or close you are will determine if the feedback is positive or negative. And then the next portion is how can we make you hit that goal? Because if they hit it, then all you do is just say, hey, great job, keep it up.
Exactly. So the purpose is to help people see themselves as others see them, to highlight the nature of the individual strengths, the areas of improvement, their contributions, right? It doesn't have to always be negative. And this also provides them a basis for learning. So the individuals have the opportunity to do things differently in the future. And for managers, feedback is a vital part in maintaining and improving performance standards. Okay, and it's important to give feedback because it's a potential to improve levels of motivation and performance. And if it's avoided or badly handled, it can cause superficial conformity, but underlying rejection and resentment, right? That's that person with that chip on their shoulder, that no matter what the organization does, is never good enough, they're not looking out for them. And that's most of the time because the situation was not handled correctly. Okay. Why is giving feedback difficult? What do you all think? Why is giving feedback difficult? You can just put it on the chat, or you can open your mic. Can damage relationships. Yes. Why else? It can be misinterpreted. Yes, it can.
It could be demotivating sometimes also.
Mhm. Right, because like Daniela says, worrying about hurting someone else's feelings, right? Or on demotivating them. Need to choose appropriate words. People take feedback differently, and for new managers, hard to predict how it will be received. 100%. I've had keys thrown out at me during a feedback session. We were actually letting the person go. Keys went flying across the table. It was interesting, but you also need to know if the feedback you're giving is gonna be a very challenging feedback, and if you need to have members of human resources available and somebody else where you don't just want to be just the two of you. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But feedback is difficult because people do not usually enjoy criticizing others, right? It is often difficult to accept it without becoming defensive. So there's often a fear that it might result in an argument or someone becoming upset. Giving and receiving praise is also often just as uncomfortable for some folks, but it's possible to learn to be better at it, right? We need to practice giving feedback. And we'll talk about some steps to do that. So some ways to give feedback is to be successful is the intention is to be helpful. And you start out with that. It includes a positive reinforcement of strengths. It decreases actual behavior. So not the individual or person or the attitudes, it's about the situation that's happening. Feedback should concentrate on areas that the receiver can control and do something about if possible, right? The feedback has to be specific, using examples to show what happened. It describes but does not judge. It concentrates on actions without seeking to interpret the intentions. So you spoke rudely at a meeting to all of senior management. That's the action. Why did that happen, right? It avoids the presentation of opinions or facts. I get the impression that you're not interested in your work, or I get the impression that something's going on. We're not making those assumptions. We're just literally taking the action that happened and coaching from there. Also, sometimes feedback is not about overloading, right? Because of things now that you want to get off your chest now because you have this forum. It's just about looking at that situation and giving enough feedback so the person has moments of reflection. And then together move to what's the next step? How is this going to be handled? How are we going to work through this? Okay. It's about being constructive. So how are things going to change in the future? What do you need? The key thing also about when to give feedback. Ideally, feedback should be given immediately. The nearer to the event, the better, because everyone can recall what happened, right? There's more concrete information. There's also not the buildup of emotions, but also recognizing that the atmosphere needs to be right. So if there's too much emotion, something just happened, someone acted out, there's too much emotion, you might just want to address it. Look, this happened today, but let's take a moment. Emotions are running a little high, and we'll just talk about it tomorrow. Or we'll talk about if it happened in the morning, we'll say, well, let's just touch base towards the end of the day and talk about what happened. So you're still acknowledging and letting the person know we're going to address this, but let's address it in another moment where everybody has a moment to, check their emotions and bring those emotions down so that it could be a productive and constructive conversation. Okay. I would always also recommend to follow up, depending on the conversation, with a follow-up email or a follow-up memo on what was discussed, especially if it's performance-related concerns or questions. Okay, and the biggest thing is that feedback should not be stored for the annual evaluation or at the end of a probation period. These check-ins and this feedback needs to be constant. When you have check-ins with your staff, if you're not meeting with your team members individually or as a group, at least monthly, you might want to consider adding those meetings to your schedule, because that's when you're talking about how it's going, how's the work going, how they're doing, what is the feedback for them. Okay, at a minimum monthly, and you can have individual check-ins and you can have team check-ins, and you decide the frequency. Okay, a good practice, like I said, a good practice is to have these discussions and not wait for the formal process, because you don't want people to be surprised by the time you're giving them a performance evaluation and you're giving them, you're scoring them low in an area that they had no clue about because there wasn't that conversation. Okay. And especially now with remote and hybrid work conditions, you may have already found out that some staff require more frequent check-ins than others, more support. So make sure you add that in to your work schedule. Those check-ins are going to save you so much time in helping to address and also to get updates on the work, because they're going to help you have time to not let everything bottle up till the end of the year when you're doing evaluations, or midway through the year when you're doing midterm evaluations. Also, if your organization only does evaluations once a year, try to add a midterm evaluation point, a very informal process to make sure that managers are meeting with their team and reviewing the goals that they set for the year, reviewing how they're performing in all these areas that they're going to be evaluated officially and formally at the end of the evaluation period. Again, this is to avoid surprises, to not let things fester, and creating a standard within your group or your managers that everyone should be meeting and discussing how things are going for their personal evaluations. Okay. Do the same for your supervisor. In one of your check-in meetings, bring in your own evaluation and say, okay, how are my goals going? Give them an update on your goals. Talk to them about how your performance is going as well. Start those conversations with your manager as well. Rob says some people interact to feedback and take it personally, not professionally. Yes. And I think there's a distinction between behavioral issues and performance issues and how to handle these different kind of situations. Yes. And you need to know when the fine line is and rely on your human resources department, if you have one, to maybe work out on a performance improvement plan. For example, if someone's tardy all the time and you meet with them to adjust their schedule so that they're no longer tardy, but they're addressing whatever need they have, but then they continue to come in late to work. At one point, you need to talk to your HR department, your human resources department, that becomes a performance improvement plan, right? Because now their attendance is an issue, or people that call out sick all the time, not following the rules, or people that take vacation very last minute and not following the process of the organization. Something as simple as that. But what is a performance issue and what is that line that people need to then come up with a performance improvement plan as their last chance of like, let's work through this because we keep having these conversations, but nothing's changing, right? And then there's an action to separate, like you need to let them go, or they've corrected their behavior and there's a non-issue anymore. There's not an issue anymore. But those feedbacks are very, very important. Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick with you all. So there's this model I wanted to introduce to you, is the onion model. So if you slice anyone through the center like an onion, we are made out of layers. At the very center is our personality, okay, which changes which is change resistant. Next is our attitudes. So made up of all those formative influences, and also very resistant to change, although less resistant than personalities. And then comes your wardrobe or your outer layer, your behaviors. The way I behave at work is different than the way you behave with family or with friends or in a social setting. And you can change my behavior like many people change their outfit, right? So this is our outer layer. We make sure we understand where we're at and we behave and act based on our environment. So this is the most open to change and feedback. This is why we talk about behavior. We don't talk about attitudes or personality when we're having feedback or we're addressing feedback. Okay, so consider aligning behavioral feedback to organizational values and behavioral competencies. Don't start, attacking the personality or the attitudes, because those are going to be very hard to change. So it's all about that behavior, that situation that happened. Okay. And then there's this SBI model. So the Center for Creative Leadership created this SBI model, the Situation Behavior Impact Model, because they wanted to find out the intention behind people's actions. So why did they act in a specific way, instead of us thinking we know why someone acted a certain way. So this is a very simple, again, some of us already do this, but now we know it has a model name. It's following a model. So it's a very simple and very direct approach. You clarify the situation, you describe the specific behavior observed, and you explain the impact their behavior had. Okay, I had a situation where one of my staff members was extremely rude during a staff meeting with our director, with everybody. They really were upset about travel reimbursements and people not following the policies. And the situation was that they really were extremely rude when addressing the group and reprimanding them. And a lot of them were senior managers. So that was the situation. So after the meeting, I pulled them aside and I said, you know, I felt this was an inappropriate way to speak to others, especially in an open forum as a staff meeting with our senior managers. You know, tell me what was going on that made you react that way. So I told them the impact, that it was an inappropriate behavior, very unprofessional. And then now I'm trying to find the intent. Tell me what was going on that made you react that way. Okay, so this is a good model for coaching and performance. And this is great, especially if you're training someone as well, right? When you're training someone, they'll do something that's not correct. So talk about the situation, talk about the behavior and the impact. And this could be used to give positive feedback as well. Oh my gosh, you handle this conversation extremely well. It really showed your knowledge and your support for the organization. You know, what made you think that way, or thank you for thinking that way. So you could use this also for positive feedback. Okay. We are going to take we're going to take about 15 minutes to get in groups of 3 and practice giving feedback. Okay. Actually, we're going to have 12 minutes. So we have a little bit to debrief. You will you will have 12 minutes. So one person will be the person giving the feedback, and we'll choose from, and you both can choose from the 2 scenarios. Okay. And identify and describe an individual and the context of the feedback, and goes over verbalizing, practicing giving feedback. If you're in a group of 4, there will be 2 observers. So one person will be giving the feedback, another person will be receiving the feedback, a third person will be observing the interaction and giving feedback to both participants. If you're in a group of 4, then there will be 2 observers. Okay. And you'll have 2 scenarios to choose from. One, your boss is not giving you definitive answers on the timeline for a deliverable, and it's making it difficult to move forward on your project. So this is about managing upwards. The other scenario is a staff member who reports to you is increasingly demonstrating a lack of motivation and slight attitude about work responsibilities. So much so that you're beginning to get complaints from other members of staff. So this is managing staff members. Okay, so you're going to get into these groups. We're going to have 12 minutes and then we'll circle back. If you have chance, if you finish, we should do this 2 rounds. So people should rotate and allowed to give feedback, at least 2 rounds per group. Okay. Awesome. Marinda, can you work your magic?
Yes, perfect. There you go.
Awesome. See you all in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. How was it? How was that?
I felt a little bit like it was a little real. It felt like I was actually getting feedback on something that I really did in my job, and I was like feeling a little upset.
Oh, okay. So what was the resolution? Like, did you and your manager at that, in the example, come up with a solution or next steps?
I think so, but I think the feedback that we got from Jules was that that we should probably work on more solutions, or like coming up with next steps or something.
And more communication.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Rita. Anybody else? Was it
And
comfortable with? Go ahead,
simplifying
Rob.
the ask,
Simplifying the ask.
like being very direct with what you want, even with your supervisor, and not think of like, not overthinking of what they would translate that to be.
Yeah,
Right,
I
keep it
think-
simple. Yeah, go ahead, Nita. I'm sorry.
Sorry, one of the things that I got out of that was sometimes, or maybe not sometimes, but being too diplomatic or trying to be too diplomatic sometimes may not have the intended effect.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you both for sharing. Anybody else comments, thoughts? How was it for you? Did you see the difference in, if you got to do both of the examples, did you see the difference between the managing up versus managing your staff and how the conversations go? And the approach is a little different, but you're still also trying to get to that resolution.
Yeah, the managing up scenario is really hard for people. And it takes a lot of courage, I think, to even begin that conversation with a supervisor. Depends on the culture of the organization, but I actually think managers have a responsibility to create the space to invite that feedback, and to make it clear that they welcome that feedback, and so that when they're receiving it, to not be defensive, to be, to listen actively to hearing the feedback, because otherwise it'll get shut down and it won't happen, and that's not good for the organization.
Exactly. And I like how you said that, Rob. We as managers have a responsibility to create that, even if it's not at the organizational level, within our teams. And we should not, as managers, be afraid to get feedback ourselves, right? Very few organizations do what they call a 360 annual evaluation, where they ask everyone in the group, including the person themselves, feedback. So how is it that you are perceiving yourself and the way you're doing your work? Let me ask other people that work with you. Let me ask your team that works with you, to really get a whole sense, a 360 sense of how the person's performance is going. And we as managers should be open to the feedback, and we also take it from where it comes from, right? So when you're giving feedback, try to make it a positive experience, sandwich it in, give some positive feedback with some areas of improvement, with this is how we're going to work together, and keep it constructive. So it's not like all negative or all positive. We're sandwiching it in between the good, the next steps. Okay. Make it regular. Again, so we're not having these buildups of emotions, or we're not just dumping in one session because we've let it all build up. Make this a regular thing with your check-ins. Be prepared for your comments, practice, write things down, bullet point things. Okay, and be specific. If you have examples, be specific. Limit your focus. Don't try to cover 10 things to work on. Break those up so we're not overloading of information, or making it too overwhelming for ourselves or for the staff person we're giving feedback. Also talk about positive. That sandwiching that I told you. Here's what's working. Here's what we need to work on. Here's the areas where, this is how we're going to work together to make it better. Right? So we're just not, again, just giving them the negatives. And follow up with an email, follow up with a memo. If there are action items, follow up, put deadlines, work through it together. You're in this together, right? If you're receiving feedback, stop your initial reaction, relax and breathe, listen actively. Also know your limits. Know, as a manager and as a person receiving feedback, if you're giving feedback as well, when the conversation is not going anywhere productive, put a stop to that situation and say, we'll continue later in the afternoon, or we'll continue tomorrow. When emotions start getting too high during these feedback sessions, it stops being productive. So you can put a stop and pause to it and reconvene. Summarize what you're reflecting, what you hear. Ask for clarification if you need to, as the person receiving feedback. And then you can accept it or not. That's on you. But just know that also those are the things that might be expected depending on the conversation. Okay, and express appreciation. Sometimes we have really good managers that are giving us feedback, are trying to really guide us in the process, and we just need to be open to that as well. Okay, I'm gonna put Sherry Hartley has a little like YouTube series on candid culture, and she has little 2-minute videos on different types of ways to give feedback, about promotions, about I want to raise, about performance issues. So great resource to have if you want to have some little tidbits. So I just put it in the chat, look her up, and her whole YouTube series will come out. Receiving feedback, simplify, acknowledge what was said, accept the feedback, make a plan to address the situation or behavior described in the feedback, and recommit to improving the behavior or situation. That is the goal as a person receiving feedback. And that is also the goal, the outline that we should have as a person giving feedback. Okay, that we're trying to address a behavior. Right, I know we covered a lot and we're 4 minutes over. So I want to leave you with one piece, one question, if you could put it in the chat. One little homework on page 25 of your workbook. There's a little section on reflection. What did you observe today? What did you learn that will stay with you? What is important to you? And what will you do or change? And then today on the chat, if you can tell me one thing that you learned is. And then I will let you go and we can reconvene tomorrow. Thank you all so much. I know we ran over and I appreciate you for sticking around. And if you could just share one thing that you learned, that would be lovely. As a manager, I need to invite more feedback. Yeah. Don't be afraid of it. Welcome it. And it's a personal growth for us as well to see how people see us. So thank you for that, Rob. The drawing exercise reminded me how important it is to have a shared understanding of the end result. Imagine how much easier it would be to delegate and communicate and describe if everyone knew it was a house from the outset. Ooh, that's a good one, Amber. Yeah, just knowing people of where we're all trying to go and work together on how to get there. I think that's important. We need to practice giving feedback. Yes, it's a skill that can be learned. You will never be comfortable at it. It's kind of like public speaking, but you could definitely get better at it. You're always going to probably still feel nervous about it. SBM motto for the feedback. Also nice to reflect on why active listening is hard and thinking of ways I can improve that. Yes. Need to work on giving feedback and active listening. Giving upward feedback is always very hard, but it is important to your subordinate to give feedback on you so you could improve yourself 100%. It's all about personal growth, right? And if you have that relationship, like Rob was saying before, you're creating that culture within your team, then it's going to not be a very contentious, uncomfortable situation for anyone, right? Because that is the expectation. And we'll talk about teams and how teams function, where it allows that space for openness and constructive feedback and recognition as well. All right. I want to thank you all so much. I know I've taken you over by 7 minutes, so I appreciate you staying together, and we will see you tomorrow right on time. Thank you all. Have a great evening, afternoon, and morning. Bye, everyone.